I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen being there.
The shift did not announce itself with a grand fanfare or a televised briefing. Instead, it materialized through a heavily guarded folder placed quietly upon the desks of senior courtiers, bearing the distinct authorization of Princess Catherine and a mandate that sent shockwaves through the institution. With a single stroke of a pen, several of her most prominent official associations were being systematically detached from charitable groups tied directly to the closest confidants of Queen Camilla. In a matter of moments, this lone endorsement split the household down the center, bringing a subterranean Cold War into the daylight. Before we dissect the true shockwaves of this maneuver, ensure you hit the subscription bell so you never miss an insider briefing. Princess Catherine sat in absolute stillness as the final documents were presented for her signature. These formal patronages, the institutional anchors binding the royal house to public charities and national causes, held immense power far beyond mere ribbon cutting. They granted massive media exposure, exclusive entry to state galas, multi-million-dollar funding spikes, and the supreme validation of the state. Yet over several years, a collection of organizations under the princess's umbrella had been quietly infiltrated by board members, strategists, and high society players known within the corridors as Queen Camilla's inner circle. What had been masked as routine bureaucratic support had slowly evolved into a stealthy takeover of influence. Prince William stood by, watching his wife scrutinize the legal order one final time. The decree forcefully shifted 4 vital charitable portfolios away from committees controlled by the Queen's allies, placing them under fresh oversight handpicked by the couple themselves. Princess Catherine paused only for a fleeting second. Her gaze turned to steel, and she inked every single document without requesting a solitary modification. The prince was well aware that this was no emotional outburst. It was the calculated execution of 6 weeks of deep undercover planning, known only to the couple, a lone constitutional expert, and a trusted private secretary. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla was received the confidential update while getting dressed for a public luncheon. Her personal stylist observed the Queen's hands freeze midair over a velvet box of family jewels as an aide whispered that the administrative purges were already legally binding. She kept her composure, never raising her voice. She merely demanded to know who had signed off on the precise phrasing, because a handwritten addendum had caught her attention. The clause stated that public service must remain untainted by the private agendas of inherited dynasties. No signature accompanied the stark warning, yet its recipient was unmistakable. To Princess Catherine, it was a shield for the vulnerable. To the Queen consort, it felt like an open declaration of war against her inner circle. The silence broke when an ousted board member bypassed protocol to phone Queen Camilla directly. In a verified record of that conversation, he issued a dark premonition that these 4 reassignments were merely the opening salvo. Princess Catherine's mandate, he claimed, was the blueprint for a sweeping eviction of old loyalists currently moving through the palace machinery. Yet the paperwork alone failed to capture why the princess chose this exact hour to strike. Because beneath the surface of those 4 reassigned organizations stood 2 formidable women, anchoring 2 conflicting definitions of crown duty, carrying scars they had never exposed to the press. To the civilian world, Princess Catherine and Queen Camilla had mastered the art of coexisting under the same historic roof, exchanging pleasantries at state banquets and displaying the stoic elegance demanded of sovereign women. But behind those stage-managed smiles, each woman had constructed an entirely different wall of defense. The princess operated under the belief that the throne must earn its reverence through transparent work. The Queen, having survived decades of public scrutiny, understood that institutional survival relied entirely on fiercely loyal networks. Now, these 2 unyielding worldviews had entered a head-on collision. Princess Catherine had woven her charitable portfolios directly into the fabric of her identity. Her focus on early childhood development, psychological well-being, and quantifiable societal change was never a public relations gimmick. An official royal link to a charity possessed the gravity to redirect millions in capital, command global headlines, and restore faith in the institution. Whenever a project bearing her name faltered, she carried the weight of that failure personally, knowing that disenfranchised families had trusted her word as a bond of honor. Queen Camilla had secured her territory through a completely different architecture. For decades, she anchored her survival on deeply rooted alliances with aristocratic patrons, cultural elites, and seasoned palace fixers. Those exact networks had shielded her through years of public condemnation and paved her path to the crown. Consequently, the queen consort viewed these sudden reassignments not as an administrative tune-up, but as a cruel betrayal of the loyalists who had protected her when the palace itself had abandoned her. Meanwhile, Princess Catherine's resentment had reached a boiling point. Programs designed to uplift destitute communities were being subtly hijacked to serve as playgrounds for high society networking and elite private dinners. Long past midnight, Prince William entered the private apartments to find charity field reports covering the floorboards. His wife gestured toward a case file of a single family whose promised rehabilitation initiative had vanished after its funding was quietly rerouted. Her voice was quiet, yet vibrating with suppressed rage, noting that her name was still stamped on the letterhead. The prince recognized that his wife no longer viewed non-confrontation as patience. She viewed it as complicity. The subsequent internal audit deepened the divide. Guest lists for high-profile galas linked to Princess Catherine had been repeatedly altered to accommodate Queen Camilla's social circle, while grassroots social workers were stripped of invitations due to sudden space restrictions. The data painted an unmistakable picture. Public duty was being systematically traded for aristocratic favor. The Queen's private secretary then intercepted another tremor. Prince William had launched a sweeping demand for all financial ledgers, board nominations, and private donations tied to the 4 disputed patronages. A singular name appeared across every ledger, a powerful operative within the Queen's faction who had orchestrated the very event that broke Princess Catherine's restraint. That name led directly back to a public reception where a quiet cruelty took place in front of the entire household, changing the princess's hesitation into an absolute point of no return. Every institutional fracture has a catalyst that seems minor until time reveals it as the ultimate line in the sand. For Princess Catherine, that line was drawn during a children's mental health gala inside the walls of St. James's Palace. What was designed as a sanctuary for struggling families transformed into an exhibition of elitism and calculated humiliation. She walked out of the ballroom with flawless composure, but those who knew her realized that a permanent shift had occurred within her. The youth mental wellness reception was conceived under one of Princess Catherine's cornerstone patronages to honor working-class parents, neighborhood counselors, and youth leaders. A royal endorsement was meant to inject credibility, funding, and public trust into their struggles. The princess had explicitly commanded that these grassroots families occupy the premier tables at the center of the hall, with elite donors and royal dignitaries positioned around the perimeter. It was the visual manifestation of her philosophy: service at the center, status at the edge. Yet hours before the doors opened, Lady Helena Ashcombe single-handedly dismantled the blueprint. The senior board member, a lifelong confidant of Queen Camilla, instructed the floor staff to relocate 6 of the vulnerable beneficiary families to a curtained room at the back, allowing billionaire donors and the Queen's social intimates to seize the primary tables. When Princess Catherine entered the room, her eyes fell upon the vacant central seats marked by children's handwritten name cards. She immediately demanded an explanation. Lady Helena responded with chilling indifference, stating the seating had been corrected to better reflect the true tier of financial patronage. The princess gave no public sign of anger. She executed her duties with absolute grace, but later discovered a young mother weeping quietly near a service corridor window. The mother confessed that her little boy believed they were hidden away because they had done something wrong. That single confession cut deeper than any institutional insult. The princess had invited those people to make them feel seen, yet her own title had been used to make them invisible. Queen Camilla arrived late to the venue, greeting Lady Helena with a warm embrace, entirely oblivious to the confrontation. Watching that embrace, Princess Catherine saw something far more dangerous than friendship. She saw systematic immunity. Standard complaints would never fix this. Prince William later unearthed evidence that the original floor plan had been overridden using an authorization stamp traced back to the Queen's household. While Queen Camilla denied any personal knowledge, the fire had already caught. A midnight audit requested by the prince exposed 3 previous incidents where working-class beneficiaries were pushed aside for the socially connected. Lady Helena dug in her heels, refusing to vacate her seat, boasting that the Queen would shield the committee. Princess Catherine answered by demanding a private audience with Queen Camilla, completely isolated from aides, lawyers, or strategists. There would be no shouting or public scandal, but behind closed doors, a decades-long truce was about to shatter. No advisors crossed the threshold. No private secretaries took shorthand. Princess Catherine and Queen Camilla faced each other surrounded by decades of unvoiced grievances, each entirely convinced she was shielding the throne from the other's critical errors. The conversation commenced with ice-cold royal etiquette, a restraint far more volatile than an open argument. The moment Princess Catherine dropped the altered state, James's seating charts onto the table, the discussion bypassed the gala entirely. It became an interrogation of systemic trust. The princess had initiated this closed encounter to spare Queen Camilla from public exposure, offering a final discreet window to dismiss Lady Helena quietly. She had hoped absolute privacy would prevent an irreversible institutional split. Queen Camilla, however, entered the room under the impression that this was a minor dispute over an overzealous board member, not a direct challenge to the vast network her allies had established across multiple charitable entities. Princess Catherine pushed the two conflicting floor plans across the wood. One showed the children at the heart of the room. The other showed them replaced by high society. She demanded to know why the Queen's name was utilized to marginalize vulnerable children. Queen Camilla disavowed the administrative order, yet she flatly refused to throw Lady Helena to the wolves, countering that institutional loyalty cannot evaporate the moment a trusted ally makes a misstep under pressure. Princess Catherine's retort landed with absolute finality. Loyalty to companions can never supersede duty to the vulnerable. The words struck with immense force. Queen Camilla heard far more than a critique of a single board member. She heard a total condemnation of the protective shield she had spent a lifetime constructing to survive hostility. The Queen pushed her chair back, slowly removing her spectacles. Across from her, Princess Catherine locked her fingers together to stop her hands from shaking. Neither woman called for assistance as the heavy silence stretched between them. Queen Camilla then disclosed through that private account, documented by a senior courier, that King Charles had personally encouraged her team to stabilize several key patronages during the period when Princess Catherine was sidelined with health issues. The intervention, she maintained, was purely protective and temporary. But the princess recognized a darker reality. Profound decisions had been engineered in her name, while she lacked the physical strength to oversee them, turning temporary assistance into permanent control. Princess Catherine stood up, announcing she was taking the files directly to Prince William and the sovereign. Queen Camilla did not block her path, issuing a singular parting warning. Then prepare yourself for the collateral damage. The Queen remained in the room, shaken but unyielding, while the princess marched the evidence toward the ultimate confrontation. Both knew that King Charles and Prince William would now be forced to choose between personal loyalty and institutional future. Princess Catherine walked away knowing the dispute had outgrown a family feud. The final resolution now rested on the two men whose word could either strip her of her work or reshape the palace hierarchy forever. A purge of this scale could not survive on moral outrage alone. It required constitutional signatures, control over household appointments, and the audacity to dismantle an entrenched network. Princess Catherine held the moral high ground, but King Charles wielded the absolute power of the crown, while Prince William held the future of it. When the three convened, the debate shifted from whether errors had occurred to who would pay the price. The king reviewed the audit files in absolute isolation before the meeting. Certain patronages shared administrative ties with both the king's and queen's offices, meaning Princess Catherine could initiate a rewrite but could never finalize a transfer without the king's sign-off. This massive portfolio of charities had once symbolized family unity. Now, it was a messy web of blurred accountability, allowing actions to be taken under royal names without anyone taking real responsibility. The sovereign reached the testimony of the 6 displaced families, removed his glasses, and set the folder down. For nearly a minute, he sat in total silence. He desperately wanted to protect Queen Camilla from public embarrassment, yet the documented exploitation was impossible to ignore. Prince William had scrutinized the ledgers himself, viewing the crisis as a symptom of a deeper rot. Royal authority was being leveraged without accountability. Remaining silent would signal to Princess Catherine that shielding the Queen's friends mattered more than the future Queen's ability to execute her destiny. Princess Catherine entered the room without a scripted defense. She simply placed a child's handwritten thank you note from the gala next to the official audit, telling King Charles that the throne cannot preach equality while allowing high society to outrank human need. Her delivery was calm, but the message was devastating. Prince William stood beside her, making the ultimatum clear. If her authority could be hijacked whenever she was absent, her life's work would never truly be her own. King Charles finally conceded to the full reassignments. He demanded the press release frame the changes as a strategic organizational renewal rather than a punitive strike. insulating Queen Camilla from direct public fallout. Prince William agreed to the compromise, but extracted an absolute guarantee. Every future appointment within Princess Catherine's patronages would require the explicit, written authorization of her own office, permanently cutting off outside influence. The king inked the executive order. Immediately, a private secretary entered with breaking developments. Lady Helena had already rallied the wider network, and several board members were preparing a coordinated mass resignation in protest. Their sudden exit threatened to paralyze the charities, humiliate King Charles, and hand Queen Camilla's allies a media weapon to claim Princess Catherine chose personal tyranny over genuine reform. The signatures had handed the princess absolute control, but that control carried immediate consequences. Before the communications team could brand the transition as a peaceful evolution, Queen Camilla's inner circle began tearing the house down in full view of the public. By dawn, the civil war had spilled past the palace gates. Resignation letters landed in rapid, calculated succession. High-profile corporate sponsorships were frozen, and lifelong royal patrons began taking sides. Princess Catherine had secured her authority, but the cost was instantly human as decade-old alliances imploded. Queen Camilla found herself utterly isolated before a single press release was broadcast, as the palace discovered that removing old influence was far simpler than containing its venom. 3 prominent trustees tied to the Queen surrendered carbon copy resignation letters, branding the new regime a total breach of institutional trust, and flatly refusing to operate under Princess Catherine's strict new governance standards. These standards dictated absolute transparency in financial spending, board appointments, and ethical responsibility. Their synchronized departure sparked an immediate panic. These individuals managed key billionaire relationships, luxury venue contracts, and major fundraising galas. Palace aides worked frantically to secure upcoming charity events before the external fallout ruined the institutions themselves. Queen Camilla read Lady Helena's final letter alone in her private sitting room. Reaching the closing sentences, she folded the parchment once and laid it beside an untouched cup of tea, instructing her staff to cancel all public appearances for the day. The Queen felt abandoned by allies who had expected her protection, yet she recognized the tactical trap she was in. Defending them publicly would look like she condoned the humiliation of poor families, while staying silent made her look weak and disloyal to those who had anchored her for decades. Princess Catherine soon received an even heavier blow. A major youth sanctuary was on the verge of losing a massive pledged endowment because a departing trustee had successfully convinced the billionaire donor to pull the funds. She stood alone, staring at the financial deficit when Prince William walked in. The princess confessed she had anticipated political anger, but never a direct economic retaliation against children. For the first time, she questioned whether her decisive strike had endangered the very souls she set out to protect. The prince countered fiercely, stating that retreating now would teach the old guard that financial blackmail still dictated royal policy. A senior treasury officer then identified a potential lifeline. An emergency financial reserve within the Royal Foundation could completely replace the lost endowment, but it required the sovereign's exclusive authorization to unlock. King Charles approved the emergency funds in absolute secrecy. He would never humiliate the Queen's allies in the press, but he refused to let their scorched earth tactics destroy Princess Catherine's reforms or punish innocent families. Queen Camilla discovered the secret financial intervention hours later. She realized King Charles had prioritized institutional stability without publicly shaming her, but he had also signaled that the era of backdoor influence was over. She requested a second private audience with Princess Catherine, explicitly asking Prince William to remain outside. Their first encounter had ended in a fracture, but this second meeting would occur without legal briefs, advisors, or procedural debates. It would force both women to decide if the modern crown still possessed room for forgiveness. This time, there was no imposing boardroom table separating them. Queen Camilla selected a small, intimate parlor, dismissed all staff, and waited beside a cold fireplace with 2 cups of tea turning to ice. Princess Catherine walked in, bracing for another defense of the old network. Instead, she faced a woman radiating the profound exhaustion of a lifetime spent fighting for a shred of acceptance. For the first time since the crisis erupted, titles vanished. They spoke as 2 individuals who knew exactly what it felt like to be entirely powerless within a system. The Queen had called for this truce after realizing King Charles had financed the emergency shield and that the reassignments were irreversible. She knew the battle was lost. Princess Catherine arrived entirely unescorted, leaving Prince William outside because she wanted no systemic shield between them. For once, the truce would be hammered out not through raw royal power, but through pure honesty. Queen Camilla explicitly stated she had never ordered the children to be moved, but she confessed to something far harder to admit. Her long-standing loyalty to Lady Helena had fostered an atmosphere where the trustee believed she was completely untouchable. Protection had evolved into permission. The Queen did not defend the system's failure, and Princess Catherine recognized the sincerity in her voice. The princess then exposed the root of her own anger. During her period of intense medical vulnerability, she was terrified of losing her grip on the single domain that gave her life purpose. Returning to find deep changes executed in her name without her consent felt like absolute proof that her identity was being quietly erased. Queen Camilla responded with her own deep scar, explaining she clung to her network because those exact individuals were the only ones who stood by her when the entire nation despised her. Stripping them of power felt like erasing the brutal decades when their loyalty was the only currency she possessed. Princess Catherine reached for a cold cup but did not drink. After an agonizing silence, she observed that while gratitude can explain personal loyalty, it can never justify permanent access to sovereign power. The words did not humiliate the Queen. They unburdened her from defending an indefensible system. She conceded the reassignments and promised to personally write to any remaining mutinous trustees, commanding them to submit to Princess Catherine's new administration. In return, the princess offered a significant concession. The official announcement would not paint the Queen's lifetime of charity work as corrupt, nor reduce her decades of public service to the sins of her advisors. Queen Camilla's personal legacy would be completely separated from the actions of those who abused her trust. This pact forged a united palace front, but out in the streets the narrative had already broken free. A major Fleet Street newspaper was locked in, printing an edition centered around a narrative neither woman had approved. Inside the palace walls, the war had finally softened into mutual understanding, but outside the gates, the public was about to judge the conflict through a sensationalized headline that defied royal control. Before dawn, delivery trucks flooded the city, news anchors dropped their scripted intros, and crowds began forming along the palace ironworks. What began as a silent signature on a parchment was now being broadcast as a brutal royal purge. Some commentators lauded Princess Catherine for reclaiming her throne, while others viewed Queen Camilla's household as being intentionally crippled. Yet amid the media firestorm, a single live broadcast grabbed the public imagination. Both royal women arriving individually at the exact same charity event, choosing to walk toward each other rather than avoid a collision. The palace press team launched an immediate counteroffensive. A formal decree confirmed that 4 of Princess Catherine's cornerstone patronages were receiving entirely restructured boards, heavy grassroots representation, and direct oversight from her personal office. Direct oversight meant that every future contract, dollar spent, and major strategy now required the stamp of the princess's core team. Media analysts instantly branded the move as proof of rival courts, while historians debated if Prince William and his wife were aggressively accelerating the transition to the next reign. The London Chronicle pushed the drama to its absolute limit, its front page displaying a split-screen photograph of the princess and the queen under the massive headline, "The Princess Takes Back Control." Television monitors looped the graphic all morning. Outside Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered along the barricades. One civilian held a makeshift sign reading "Charity Before Connections," while another argued to reporters that the Queen was taking the fall for the actions of rogue courtiers. Princess Catherine watched the feed briefly before cutting the power. The public venom directed at Queen Camilla disturbed her far more than any criticism aimed at herself. She ordered her media team to scrub any vocabulary from their statements that sounded like a victory dance. She had fought for systemic reform, not personal destruction, and she refused to let her victory morph into public cruelty. Queen Camilla saw the exact same front page and recognized its lethality. She had spent a lifetime watching every institutional crisis become an argument that she did not belong. Now, this transfer was being written as another public humiliation of her being pushed into irrelevance, even after she had voluntarily agreed to step aside. Later that afternoon, both women stepped out for a long-scheduled literacy campaign gala. Princess Catherine walked directly toward Queen Camilla in full view of the lenses, greeted her with genuine warmth, and stepped aside to let the Queen enter the building first. The choreography was deliberate. The structural reforms would remain absolute, but public degradation would not be tolerated. The palace subsequently made public the names of the newly appointed board members, a working-class parent advocate, a leading pediatric expert, a veteran community fundraiser, and one highly respected operator from Queen Camilla's wider circle. The impeccably balanced list changed the media narrative almost overnight. The tabloid circus began to collapse, but the true weight of Princess Catherine's victory would only be realized when the doors swung open for the premiere event of the newly reformed patronage. Weeks later, the exact same grassroots families who had been hidden away in the back of the streetless side, James's ballroom walked through the grand entrance of the new venue as the primary guests of honor. Their name tags were exactly where they belonged at the premier tables in the center of the room. Princess Catherine stood waiting to receive them, while Queen Camilla arrived entirely unescorted by the courtiers who had once controlled the space. What began as a raw turf war over institutional influence ended by forcing the crown to remember the most basic tenet of its existence. The people must always come first. The princess selected a local family crisis center for this inaugural gathering under the rewritten charter. This structural link between a royal title and a social cause carried immense responsibility, and hosting the event far away from palace luxury sent an unmistakable signal. Social elitism would no longer dictate public service. The new governance bylaws legally locked board seats for medical specialists, frontline organizers, family representatives, and transparent financial auditors, with every single vacancy subject to an open review. During the reception, Princess Catherine locked eyes with the young mother she had comforted in the corridor weeks prior. The woman stepped forward, introducing her little boy, who handed the princess a folded crayon drawing of their family beneath a short sentence. "We belong here." The princess fought back tears. That basic sentence validated that her campaign had never been about raw power. It had restored basic human dignity to individuals whose faith had been exploited, while her name was stamped on the door. Nearby, Queen Camilla approached the beneficiary families completely detached from her remaining staff. The queen openly acknowledged to them that she had failed to examine how her private friendships had warped the organizations around her. While she did not pretend she engineered the errors herself, her raw accountability carried immense weight, separating true institutional responsibility from empty PR apologies. Before departing the venue, she turned to Princess Catherine, whispering that protecting the crown sometimes demands cutting ties with the very people who once shielded you. The princess replied that the sacrifice would be honored, and the two women left the building side by side. Lady Helena and the rebellious faction never crossed the palace threshold again. Their institutional access was permanently severed. The frozen corporate endowments were completely replaced, and every single youth program continued without interruption. King Charles issued an official royal endorsement of the new administrative template, while Prince William verified that these exact accountability metrics would eventually be implemented across the entire national royal patronage network. The resolution yielded no broken victims and crowned no triumphant conqueror. Princess Catherine secured her structural transparency. Queen Camilla protected her legacy through raw accountability. The sovereign preserved the family's survival by embracing modern evolution, and the future king saw a clean, modern framework emerge from the ashes. Personal friendships could still be cherished in private, but never at the expense of public duty. And with the charities finally returned to the people, the palace turned the page not through the bitterness of revenge, but through a fiercely debated, hard-won understanding that the crown only endures when the mandate of service remains greater than status, greater than friendship, and greater than fear. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and we will see you in our next briefing.